Elephants are so cool. They are the largest land mammal on Earth. Their tusks are actually teeth, and the part of their brain associated with memory is larger than people's. They really do never forget. Today I'm talking to Helen Mylne. She is a British PhD who has been studying elephant behavior at Elephants for Africa in Botswana. There are three different kinds of elephants: Asian, African savanna, and African forest. They seem so loving with a granny in charge and the young being cared for by the whole herd of female elephants. Is that really how it works?
Yeah, pretty much. So females generally stick with their mothers and sisters for their whole lives. And they only really split up if they're forced to, just because the herd's got so big that there's not enough food for all of them. And then they tend to just split into two smaller herds. But it's a little bit more complicated because if you've got two herds led by, for example, two sisters or two cousins, they'll tend to hang out as two groups together more often than if you had two groups that had unrelated females leading them. So you sort of have these little herds that are really closely related, and then you have bigger groups that tend to split up and come together, made up of the little herds. So yeah, they do very much have the granny leads the herd.
How old can elephants live up to?
Elephants are pretty long lived. So in zoos, you can, I think the record is an elephant in her 70s. But in the wild, females tend to live to between 50 and 60, absolute maximum. Males are a little bit younger, somewhere between 40 and 50. But you can occasionally get really old individuals, almost the same length of time as we are.
That's really cool. And male elephants tend to live in small bachelor groups?
Yeah, so males are a little bit funny, and we actually don't really know a huge amount about how males live together. So that's actually what I'm studying, is trying to work out what are the boys doing, really. Who do they hang out with? Do they stay with the same individuals for a long time, or do they just spend a little bit of time together and then they move on again? But yeah, generally the boys will start out living just as the girls do. They live with their mothers and their aunties and their sisters. But then once they get a little bit bigger, they start to split off and go their own separate way. So that can be usually around about 14 years old, but it can be as young as about 8. Can be as old as more like 18, and they'll just sort of gradually start to spend less time with the females and start hanging out with other males. So yeah, they're in these little bachelor groups, but we don't know how long each of those groups stays together. They tend to chop and change quite a lot. They'll go off with other males. Sometimes they spend quite a bit of time by themselves, which the females never do. So yeah, they change a lot more what they're doing throughout their lives compared to the females.
So they just wander around.
Pretty much, yeah. They follow where the food is what the males do. And what I'm trying to do is work out whether the young ones are learning from the older ones. So whether actually are the young males who've just left their mothers, are they actually deliberately finding older males and following them to learn how to find the food that they need and how to find the water that they need and this sort of thing.
Cool. You work with African elephants, but both they and Asian elephants' populations have declined 90% in the last century. Less than 500,000 of them remain in the wild, and 70% of these use space outside protected areas. Why are their numbers decreasing?
So I don't really know a huge amount about Asian elephants, I have to admit, but I think a lot of the things that as the problem is the same. So a huge part of it is just lack of space. There's too many people and too many elephants trying to use the same area. So each time you get a new town appears or a new road appears, it separates out the different parts of where the elephants are living and reduces the amount that they can move through the areas that they used to use to get to water and to get to food. So it means that you then have just little pockets of populations that can't get together. So that's the main thing, is actually that it's just too many people around. And also people then tend to have cows and sheep and goats. So we've got livestock that are eating the food that the elephants used to eat. So there's just too many people and elephants in the same space. There's also issues with poaching where people shoot elephants for their ivory. Two very different issues, but all basically comes back to the fact that we don't have enough stuff for everybody.
So people are taking cropland for themselves, basically.
Yes, but it's a very difficult problem to try and solve because generally it's not people being greedy, it's people just physically taking the land that they need to feed themselves. So they move into a new area and they grow their crops on the land that has enough water to grow crops. But then if there's water there, that's where the elephants go. So then the elephants come in and they eat those crops from the people, and then people suddenly have no food. So it goes both ways. The elephants are eating people's food, but then the people are taking the elephants' land to grow more crops. because they have no crops because the elephants ate them. So this is what I mean where I say there's just not enough space for either the people or the elephants. And anywhere that you've got people and elephants together, you get conflict of interest. People want one thing, elephants want the same thing, and we've got a problem.
What is the funniest story you've had about studying elephants?
I spend a lot of time laughing when I'm out studying the elephants, but I'm usually laughing with the guys that I'm with. It's not necessarily about studying the elephants. I think probably the best one I could think of was where I was living in Botswana. We were just camping in the national park. So we had tents and we had a fairly basic shower that was literally just a hose over your head behind a bush. And I was showering and I turn around and there's an elephant 2 meters behind me who's come to check out the water and see where this water's coming from. And I was just sort of go, well, there's nothing I can really do about this, because if I move and try and get out the shower, I'm going to freak him out. So I just had to stand there and continue showering and hope he went away. Thankfully he did. I think that was quite a good one, I think. Yeah, also I was collecting some poo samples out when I was out there. So elephant does a poo, we then have to wait for the elephant to go away so that we can go and pick it up. And occasionally they decided to defend it and they just would not let me get their poo. And I'm like, you don't need it, you've got rid of it. But no, I was not allowed to go and get that poo. They were very, very strongly defending their poo.
You wrote you were known on campus as the girl who studies elephant poo. What can you learn about elephants from poo?
Poo is actually an amazing thing to study. We can learn so much about animals from their poo. So the branch of biology that I work in is actually called ecology, which is basically the study of how animals interact with their surroundings. So how they communicate with other animals, like the food they eat, what eats them, all of that sort of thing is ecology. And we tend to be known as the group of scientists that you put us in a room for 5 minutes, at some point we will start talking about poo. It's just what ecologists do, because we can learn so much from it. So at the simplest level, for example, with the elephants, if there is poo there, then I know that there were elephants here recently. If I go outside now, I can tell you there's no elephants around here, because elephants poo about 17 times a day, and each one is about this size. So it takes quite a long time to wash away. So if I went outside and there's no elephant poo around, I know there hasn't been elephants around. So that's at a very simple level. Just if it's there, we know there's been elephants. And we can tend to try and guess actually how many elephants there have been around just based on the amount of poo that there is. We can also try and guess how old they are. So a very small, a little baby elephant only has a poo about this size. By the time they're fully grown, each poo can easily be about this kind of size. So we can just measure the outside of it and see how old was this elephant. We can dig down into it, find out what they've been eating. Again, going back to what we were just talking about, we can see if they've been eating crops. Elephants only actually digest about 40% of what they eat. So you can actually open it up and you can just find the leaves and the sticks and the grass. And from that, we can find out what species they've been eating. We can see if they're healthy. We can see, are they stressed? So when we're stressed, we release a chemical called cortisol. We can look in the poo and find that cortisol. So we can see if the elephants are happy or not from their poo. What I'm looking at is, so if we've got 2 elephants that are both pooed, we can look at the inside the poo and we can actually find out whether those elephants are related to each other. So we can see, are they brothers? Are they cousins? Are they father and son? Are they completely unrelated to one another? So that's actually what I'm looking at, but we can learn so much from the poo of an animal.
That's really cool. Is it scary going to Africa by yourself to study wild animals? I mean, it's not like here in Toronto where the scariest animal you're going to see is a trash panda, which we call raccoons.
I think I would guess that Canada is probably still scarier than the UK. The scariest thing we've got is badgers, and they're certainly not in the cities either. But honestly, yes, Africa can be really scary. There are a lot of dangerous animals in Africa. I have been charged a couple of times by elephants and by lions. Thankfully, I was always in a car at the time. But, you know, my colleagues were chased through camp by a hippo, hippos are incredibly dangerous. You know, we've got crocodiles, we've got hyenas, leopards, buffalo. Most of the animals there either want to kill you because you're in the way or want to kill you because you look tasty. There's not a lot else. So, yeah, during my most recent trip, the camp that I was living in, we did used to get lions wandering through at night. And we were living in tents. So if you had to leave your tent at night, you just had to get your torch and shine it around and check that there was nothing there to eat you before you went to the loo. So yeah, it is scary. And rule number one in Africa is always enjoy the wildlife, but from a safe distance, and you've got to respect their personal space and don't scare them. It's the animals always come first out there. But what I would say, I've never been too scared, particularly because I've always been living with people who've lived there their whole lives. You know, they're looking out for me, they're showing me how to work out there safely. And my colleagues very quickly used to become, you know, they were my best friends. You know, I had their back, they had mine. And we were always, you know, checking out for each other, making sure that everyone was safe. And that does help to make it a lot less scary.
What do you wish more people knew about elephants?
I think elephants are just the most beautiful animals on this planet. And not because they've necessarily got a beautiful coat, but they're so intelligent. And I think I wish more people could see that intelligence and had the opportunity to really interact with them and get to know them, because they have incredible characters. They've really got personalities when you actually get to know individuals. And part of that, they're just incredibly smart. They're so smart. I think one of the best things I ever saw, not for the people who owned the fence, but it was great to watch. So a group of about 10 elephants walk up to an electric fence, and the first one of them reached out with their trunk, tapped it, tested that it was on, and then they went and got a stick and broke the fence down with the stick instead, because the stick wouldn't electrocute them. And you just get, they're so intelligent. And I think that's what I wish more people could have the opportunity to see and appreciate. I would say my other just fun fact about elephants, and that I just think is really cool. Elephants can actually hear through their feet. They've got those enormous ears, which really, so they've got great hearing normally as well, but they talk to each other through the ground. They make these really, really low sounds that we can't hear because they travel through the ground, just that vibrating the ground a little bit. And what they'll do, if you ever watch an elephant that gets a little bit scared, it'll roll up onto its tiptoes so that that big fat pad on the bottom of its feet is pressed against the ground slightly differently. And they use that to feel the vibrations in the ground. And so they're listening through their feet. Just go up onto their tiptoes when they need to listen to something. And I think that's so cool. It's an entire sense that we don't have, or we do have, but is far more developed in them than it is in us.
Thanks so much for joining me. Click the link below to donate to Elephants for Africa. And remember, together kids can save the world. Please like and subscribe. Thank you. I got so excited talking to Helen about elephants that I forgot to ask her about what we can do to save them. It turns out there's a lot kids can do. The number one thing you can do is get educated. Learn about elephants and share what you know. Do presentations at school and tell your friends and family about what you learned. Become a kid who really loves elephants. Obviously, never buy ivory. Coltan is a very rare mineral that is used in things like mobile phones and originates in the Congo forest. So always recycle your devices. Choose elephant-friendly tea and coffee. Always pick fair trade. You can fundraise, do a yard or bake sale. Once I raised $72 one afternoon for World Wildlife Federation selling lemonade outside my house on a summer day. It was really fun. Sell handmade bracelets, do a run, a bike, or even a canoe ride to raise money. Can't think of anything you need for your birthday? Ask your friends and family to give to your favorite animal charity on your birthday instead. Lots of elephant charities have elephant-themed things you can give as a gift. You can even adopt an elephant. There are so many things you can do to help elephants, and they need you. So let's get to work.